Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Food Fight, submitted by Alex Y. I just graduated from college recently and thought that you would find this story good for your channel. I've been a long-time listener, and I know that once in a while you do shows about specific things, so here goes. Shoot me an email if you do actually read this. 2 summers ago, I went back to the pizza place that I had worked at for the previous 3 summers when I was home on summer break from college. While waiting to find a position in my field and considering moving out of town to do so, I figured, hey, I need to keep working and not sit on my butt. My parents were cool to let me stay at home, but they also expected me to pull my weight and chip in with groceries and stuff like that, rather than pay for rent. And the job was kind of fun, and I liked the people who owned the place. Delivery jobs can be pretty hectic and hell on your vehicle, but that's not the issue with this story. I had a pretty beat-up pickup, but it was still reliable enough that I could ensure that deliveries would be made on time. It was actually pretty good on gas, and the tips were usually really good in my area. That was the bonus of being a delivery driver. Yeah, there's a lot of pressure involved, and lots of crazy stuff can happen. And the owners knew that we were beating the shit out of our vehicles, but they always allowed us to keep our tips, and we didn't have to share them with everybody else. They paid us a decent wage, and with frequent tipping, it made everything worthwhile. I've been in some strange situations, and please don't be mad at me that I listen to other horror channels, but I can relate to a lot of the stories that I hear that those people have told. I've never had anybody try to kidnap me or anything like that, but this story is about one night that went south, and things ended up okay in the end because my friend was with me. It was a late Saturday night, and we were wrapping things up at our store. I had one last delivery, and my friend Sam came over to the shop as we were going to go to a late movie and meet some girls there. I wasn't into the Rocky Horror Picture Show, but I really liked this girl, and that's the only reason I agreed to go with Sam. I told him to meet me at my shop, and he could go on my last delivery. Then I could run home, get a quick shower, and we could meet the girls and not have to have the hassle of both of us driving and running around wasting time. My owner said, hey, keep the money, bring it in tomorrow so we can square up the till, and just, man, have a good night. So I got the pizza, put it in its warm box, got it in my truck, and off we went. I punched the address into my iPhone, and we made our way over to a pretty sketchy part of town. It's funny that no matter where you go, there's always a sketchy part of town, and I'm not trying to be arrogant and say that I look down on people that might not have the ways and means of others, but it is what it is. Every town has a sketchy part of town. The street lights in front of the house that we had to stop at had been knocked out, so there was some light from the street lights a ways up and in front of us and behind us, but there were no lights on at the house at all that we went to. I told Sam, chill man, I'll be right back, got the pizza out and went up to the front door. I rang the bell, but didn't hear anything, so I stood there for a few minutes, and then I banged on the door. I still didn't hear anything. Stood there for a few more minutes. And then I called my owner and said, hey, can you please call these people to see if they still want this pizza because no one's answering the door? He said he'd try, and I said I'd wait. But before he could get back to me, I heard some footsteps coming from a very narrow driveway between houses off to my right. Then I heard footsteps coming from across the front lawn off to my left. I knew something was up, and my head was on a swivel. There were 2 guys coming from both directions, and I knew they were not there for the pizza. It's not a little-known fact. It's a majorly known fact that pizza delivery guys are often easy marks, because a lot of these people know how much cash they could be carrying. And that was the case this night. Before I could even set the pizza down to defend myself, the guy off to my left said, give me your fucking wallet. And the other guy kind of stopped to see what I would do. And immediately I said, fuck you, you're not taking anything from me. I'm sure there are a lot of people who would say, dude, you should have just handed the money over. But I've heard too many stories from my friends and on YouTube that, man, they gave up their money and their wallets and then still got their ass kicked. I'm 6'2", 220, and still play competitive hockey. I'm not a guy who backs down easily, but at this point I was a little nervous because it was 2-on-1. It was dark. But again, thankfully, My man Sam was also watching and noticed what was going on. I keep a little billy club in my car, kind of like a police baton. Sam had already grabbed it and jumped out of the car. As the guy on my right moved close to me, he flipped out a butterfly knife and just said, "Give me your fucking wallet." I don't think they noticed Sam at all because they were focused on me, but suddenly I heard the guy on my left scream out in pain as Sam smashed him behind his knee with the billy club, and the dude crumpled like a sack of potatoes. The guy with the knife lunged at me and almost got me in my arm. That was before I could bring my forearm straight into his nose, and he also dropped, holding it, going, "You fucking broke my nose! You fucking broke my nose!" Sam started kicking the other guy on the ground in the face, and then moved over to bash the guy who had the knife, and I just yelled, "Dude, let's just get the fuck out of here." Before we did that, I grabbed the guy's knife that he had dropped, and I whipped it into the street. Sam gave the other guy one more shot with the billy club, and we ran to the street and I peeled out of there. That's when my owner called me back on my iPhone. I was out of breath, I was freaked out, and it was very hard for me to even tell him that we had just been almost rolled by two guys at this address. He said, "Get your ass back to the shop, I'm calling the cops." And I said, "Fine, but hey, I don't want to spend too much time on this because I really need to meet this chick." Yeah, I'm that romantic. Or maybe that was just the adrenaline and I'm being such an idiot. The police were already there at the shop, and they had to send someone else out to the address, and we had to make the whole statement thing with them about what had happened. They tried to look into whoever lived at the house, but they found out that it was vacant, and the phone that the guy had made the order from was one of those burner-type phones that are pay-as-you-go. They were no longer at the house when the other cops showed up, which didn't surprise me at all. I'm sure they just got the hell out of there, too. I kept delivering for the rest of that summer, but kept that billy club really close to me at all times. And by the way, we didn't mention that to the cops, or Sam literally booting this guy in the face while he was on the ground. But at the same time, fuck those guys. They got what they deserved, and we got to walk away and talk about it and have a great story. I ended up having to leave that job due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but I now have a job in my field with what I look back on as a scary night, a tense moment, but like I said, a pretty cool story to tell people. I'm not trying to be an internet tough guy, guys. This is really what happened. The best part is it's verifiable because my best friend Sam was there. Everybody delivering food out there, whether you're doing it for a local place, a chain, Uber Eats, or whatever it is, be careful and always be on your guard. Be aware of your surroundings, and be safe. It sounds stupid, but it's kind of like a brotherhood of people who do this sort of work, and I hope everyone makes their deliveries and goes home in one piece. My first job, submitted by Jenny J. Jones. I grew up in a small town outside of Indianapolis. I'm a female, and at the time I was 16 and trying to save for college and get the heck out of my little hick town. I took a job as a server at a pizza place and worked a lot of weekend evening hours. Outside of lunches, most of our business was takeout or delivery, despite a pretty nice seating area. Everything was going great, and I liked talking with the customers and my coworkers in the back who were making the food while I was, quote-unquote, screwing off up in front, as they said. My manager was a really nice guy named Brian, and he also trained me on how to make sandwiches, pizzas, run the fryer, and that stuff, so I could help if I had to. Like I said, I really liked it there. The money was meh, but it was still a fun job. One night, I was working after school, and I'm pretty sure it was a Wednesday because Tuesdays and Wednesdays we only stayed open until 10. And my parents wanted me to be home for school the next day, not like on the weekends. Around 9 o'clock, this really strange guy came in, ordered a sub, and I sent the order back. I told him that he could take a seat as it would take a few minutes, but he just stood staring at me. I busied myself with some dishes that the busser had left on the counter and brought them to our back sink. When I went back to the front counter, the guy was still standing there, staring at where I was standing before. I got back into his view and asked if he needed anything else, and he just looked at me with these vacant eyes, shaggy beard, and greasy hair. "You're pretty sexy. How old are you?" he asked. Brian happened to be walking over and told the guy that what he had said was inappropriate. His sub was ready, so I took his money. He took the food and smiled at me and left. He had dropped a 50 on a $7 sub and just walked out. Brian shook his head, took the money, made change, and handed me $25 and said that was creepy and I deserved the extra for that. I went home, and the guy left my mind. That summer, I got my license in my first car, a Kia Rio wagon. Yeah, a station wagon. Don't judge me. I asked if I could try delivery one night a week, and while my mom was very hesitant about it, she finally said okay, and so did Brian. One of the guys had just recently quit, and he needed help on Friday nights, and we rarely had a lot of in-house customers on Friday nights anyway. My first delivery was to a house a few miles outside of town. It was an old farmhouse, so I double-checked the address and was on my way. Awesome. Driving with the windows down, not stuck inside, and hopefully the start of some great tips. An older woman met me at the door, and I handed her over to the pizza, and she paid me. She gave me $5 extra. Score. I said thanks and went back to the shop, and Brian was happy that I was quick and said, "Listen, it's going to be getting faster, so you're going to be making multiple runs for the rest of the night." I mean, no problem in my mind. If I got $5 at every place I went, I'd have a decent chunk of change at the end of the night. My next delivery was 2 different places in sort of the same area, but it didn't hit me right away. The second stop on my loop back to the shop was the same place of my first delivery. I guess they're hungry, I thought. I dropped off my first order and then headed back to the other place. When I got there pulling into the U-shaped driveway, I noticed the car that had been in the driveway before wasn't there. I went to the door, and that's when I noticed someone in the front window looking through the curtains, but as soon as I looked at them, they slid them back. I rang the doorbell, and I heard a man's voice say, "Door's open, come on in." That's a big no thanks. I said, "I can't do that. $14.75, please." Silence. The door was open a crack, and I was listening for someone to come to the door. "Door's open. Come on in," said the voice again. I repeated that I couldn't do that, and then heard someone walking to the door. It opened up, and there, standing in front of me, was the guy who was in my shop staring at me not too long ago. Oh, by the way, he was totally naked and, well, touching himself. I backed up, and he opened the screen door and said, "You're prettier than last time. I'm here for the rest of my money." I dropped the food and ran to my car, jumped in almost in tears. He came running out, still naked, of course, slipped on the pizza box, wiped out, and a car pulled into the driveway. As I mentioned, the driveway was U-shaped, the one that ran right up to the front door, so I could hit the gas as the other car pulled in. I drove right past the guy who was getting up with sauce and cheese all over him, and again, he was still holding himself. As I pulled onto the road, I saw the old lady who I had met earlier get out of her car and run over to the guy, and I just got the heck out of there. As soon as I got back, Brian pulled me aside to the office and said that the woman had called to apologize. The guy was her son, and he had a pretty serious drug problem. And I thought maybe he had some mental issues, but it turns out he was just a meth head. The woman was very apologetic to my boss, begged us to not call the police, but Brian told her that was up to me, and then he hung up on her before I got there. We talked about it. He was adamant about calling the police, and I was crying at this point. I finally said, "Look, I don't want to do anything. I don't want you to tell my parents, but I don't want to be a delivery driver anymore." He said okay, and that's where it ended. I hope that guy got the help that he needed, but I have zero clue what became of him. Brian did call the woman back and told her that they were never allowed to get food from our shop again. When he told the owner about it, the owner put their names up on a board at the front to remind everyone that these people were kicked out for life. We did that a lot back then. I worked there for another year, but my first night delivering pizzas was my last. The Pizza Creeps, submitted by Oliphant. When I was in high school in the mid-90s, I took a job as a pizza delivery guy. I had a pretty reliable car. It was a Honda Civic that my grandparents had given me, and I took really good care of it. Nothing to do with the story, but I put 227,000 plus miles on that thing before I got a different car. Anyway, the pizza place I worked for was really great, and they really took good care of the workers. I know other guys that got into some shitty places where their pay was docked if a customer didn't pay the right amount, or they would get blasted if a customer wouldn't pay and the food came back. Bunch of dicks, right? My boss Anthony was not like that at all. He really went out of his way to take care of the drivers and everyone else for that matter. One Friday night, it was getting close to closing, and right at the edge of our delivery time, we got an order for 2 large pizzas and a bucket of wings. My boss took the order because it was pretty substantial, and he thought it was worth the drive. I was the last driver on that night. So, after he gave me the address, I checked it out on this wall map as the place was on a pretty busy road, and I wasn't sure if it was a house or a business. It's not that way anymore, I'm sure, with the advent of GPS and smartphones. I got the food in my car and headed out listening to 311 and having a smoke, thinking about getting out of work, listening to 311 and having a different kind of smoke later with my friends. I drove to the address and immediately thought something was wrong, but nothing too terrible, if you know what I mean. It was just odd. The place was a rundown auto repair place that I thought had been closed for a while, and there was a van in the parking lot and a guy standing by a car with the bay door of the place open, but the lights weren't on. I pulled in, did a quick U-turn to be able to drive out into traffic rather than back out onto the road. The guy waved and I got out. I grabbed the food and he pointed to the van and said, "You can take it over there," as the sliding door was open, and a woman sat there listening to some shitty hair metal with a TV tray table set up. I saw the guy going for his wallet and then said, "Oh shit, I left the money inside." The woman looked at me and said, "You can leave that stuff with me, honey." I hate to be a judge now, but back then I sized her up and thought, total trash. This was 1995, and she still had the big hair, black shiny spandex, and a Skid Row t-shirt on. I went over to her and smelled something bad. I mean, not weird or old oil or anything like that, just something really rank. At first I thought maybe it was coming from the field behind the place, as I knew there was a farm back there. But that wasn't it, and I couldn't put my finger on what it was. The woman lit a cigarette as I stood there, and she said again, "Bring that over here, honey." I looked into the dark bay of the garage trying to see where the guy went, but I couldn't place him. The closer I got to the van, the worse the smell became. But I could also smell the massive amount of perfume on this lady, and that was just waiting there for the food. So I walked over, put the 3 boxes on this little TV tray thing that she was sitting next to, and I kind of looked into the van. There were a ton of black garbage bags filled with God knows what behind her. She smiled at me, opened her legs, and asked if I wanted to party, and that's when I got the weirdest feeling down my spine. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the guy coming out of the garage bay with what I assumed was my money, but I also felt someone coming up from behind me. I said what the price was, I think probably like $30 or something. That's when I noticed the woman's eyes looking behind me. I can't say why I did what I did, but I immediately spun around and threw a total haymaker at what I knew was not going to be air. I am not a fighter, and I don't know why I did that, but I did. Well, yep, there was a guy coming up behind me, and I caught him right on the button. He fell down, I yelled out because my hand hurt, and the other guy yelled at me, and the woman jumped up and tried to pull me into the van. I fell backwards as she wrapped her legs around me, trying to yank me into this van, and I fumbled for my Halt. For anyone who doesn't know what Halt is, it's a pepper-based spray that mailmen carry to ward off crazy dogs. Back then I was a pretty avid runner, and I always carried it with me, always had it, never had to use it. But right then, I took it off my belt, sprayed the woman right in the kisser over my shoulder, got up, hit the guy approaching me, and then back towards my car, slipping on a pair of illegal-as-hell brass knuckles that I always kept in my back pocket. I yelled at them to stay the fuck away from me, and the guy I punched was getting up. The woman and the man were rubbing their eyes and yelling, I just got back to my car and tore out of there, not even looking at the traffic. I sped back to the pizza shop, told my boss what had happened, and he immediately called the police. They went out there, but the van and the people were gone. There was $2 lying on the ground in front of the garage bay, which the police had determined had been jimmied open. But I was right. That place had been closed for a long, long time. They came back to the shop and asked me a lot of questions, and I gave my best answers, but I never heard anything back from them. Those people got away with the food, but they didn't get me. I don't know what they had in that van that smelled so bad, or why they tried to get me there in the first place, but I don't care. I got away, and I only delivered pizzas for like a week after that, before taking a job in a lumberyard. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories, and thanks to everyone who submitted their creepy pizza delivery stories. I've been keeping these kind of on the back burner, and I know a lot of people are asking why I'm not uploading as much as I did in the past, but man, I'm very busy, and you might see more of these kind of specialized episodes with a little bit less of length of time. Having said that, if you have a true scary story you would like to hear narrated on my channel, email Uncle Josh, truescarystories@gmail.com. As always, I read them all. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Follow me on social media. All the links to that are in the description below. And of course, if you want to save on bandwidth, find me on your favorite podcast platform. I upload all of my shows shortly after I put them on YouTube. Until next time, everyone be excellent to each other, and be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.